So,
Good afternoon, doctors. To start the session, I would like Dr. Dinesh Talwar to please take over the session. Over to you, Dr. Dinesh.
thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are back to AIOC 2021, not physically, but at least virtually. And we have a very nice IC for you on OCTs. All the aspects will be discussed, whether it's the anterior segment, the glaucoma, and the posterior segment. There is no question that today OCT is the bedrock of virtually entire ophthalmology. And it's such a versatile instrument, it can be used for anything. Starting from the cornea all the way to the retina, you have the OCT along the way. And not only, it's just not a companion, it is an inseparable companion, and a companion who can make a huge difference to the quality of your work, the quality of the services that you deliver, and the quality of the patient satisfaction. So let's start immediately. We will first discuss about OCT in glaucoma. This is an important topic, and I hope that Charu will tell us all the tips which we need to know to accurately understand how to use OCT for the management of our glaucoma patients. Over to you, Charu. Dr. Charu, incidentally, is a senior consultant at Center for Sight, and she specializes in management of glaucoma. She's also very keen on low vision aids. So we've now given her dual responsibilities, and she is one of our best, one of our stars. So over to you, Charu.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible and is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Go ahead.
So I thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about OCT in glaucoma and for your kind words. Now, glaucoma, as we all know, is a triad of high intraocular pressure, optic nerve cupping, as well as visual field changes. But we know that there can be a wide variation in these, and often the cupping changes will precede the visual field loss by about 5 years. Visual fields can often not be always reliable or reproducible, and there are also fluctuations and errors in how the patients perform them. So we have OCT, which helps us to diagnose and follow up pre-perimetric glaucoma, helps to confirm whether the visual field defect is real or an artifact, and helps to monitor progression. Now, this is the standard RNFL analysis that we're all familiar with. We know the color coding. We know that there is a circumpapillary scan which is being used, and it is giving us the sectoral as well as the quadratic distribution, with red indicating significance less than 1% of the normative database being red and yellow being less than 5%. We are also able to evaluate the optic nerve head, which the OCT outlines the optic nerve head and the cup and disc borders, and gives us all these parameters that we can evaluate. And the third thing the OCT tells us for glaucoma is the ganglion cell complex, which consists of the NFL, the ganglion cell layer, and the inner plexiform layer. So this is how the GCC analysis appears as a deviation map, the blue indicating about 20 to 30% damage and the black indicating more than 50% loss. And the significance map is what we look at. And we find that the ganglion cell layer damage correlates even more with the visual fields and occurs much earlier even than the RNFL thinning. So in a normal patient, this is how the GCC will appear. In patients where the visual field effects have not yet started, but there is early disease, there will be areas of ganglion cell thinning. And then, of course, in severe functional loss, we find that the GCC loss has increased significantly. Now, normally the GCC as well as the RNFL changes will correspond, but you should be cautious in patients with macular edema and also in patients with ERMs, because there is where you may get a higher GCC thickness. However, remember that macular changes will occur even before the RNFL changes, and in this, the focal loss is more significant than the global loss, which may occur as part of myopia or an increased axial length or even as part of aging. Now we can also see the progression. So you see this is the progression map where the earliest OCT shows a normal RNFL and this is gradually progressing. Whereas in the GCC analysis, you see here the RNFL hasn't yet shown any deficit, but the GCC has already given it to us, and of course a progression. By the last stage, we really do not need a OCT to help us, where we can use the visual fields. So glaucoma progression is the next thing that OCT helps us with a widening, deepening, or a new RNFL defect appearing as a side of progression. And it is best when combined with the GCC. And after 40 to 50 microns, the defect really floors off. And at this point, the visual fields are a better scenario. Now, we are going to focus mainly on clinical situations. So let us begin with the first slide here. A proper centration of the map is very important. So if you have a properly centered scan, you will find the good double hump pattern. But if we have an inferiorly decentered scan, then we'll have inferior RNFL loss, which is erroneous. And similarly, if it is superiorly decentered, we'll have a superior loss. So here is a scan which appears as an area of increased RNFL loss, but here the location is not appropriate. And once you've done the RNFL scan again, we find that this is actually a normal RNFL thickness. Yet another example where I want to show you how the signal strength gives us an idea. You see this scan showed a lot of RNFL thinning, but look at the signal strength here is only 1 as compared to when we repeated the scan with a higher signal strength. And even for the left eye, the RNFL thickness definitely improved. So definitely look at the location and the quality of the scan before you confirm your findings. I'm going to show you here a few other clinical cases. This is a patient with 0.7 thinning in the cupping in the right eye and 0.6 in the left eye. And the IOP was elevated in the right eye. The corneal thickness was on the thinner side. We found that there was an inferior field defect. So this is the first indication we talked about, where an OCT will help us to confirm whether this visual field defect is really glaucomatous. And we repeated this and we found that the OCT has confirmed the diagnosis. The inferior field defect is indeed corresponding to the superior RNFL thinning. And this patient was started in the for treatment in the right eye, and the left eye was monitored. The second patient, we find advanced cupping in the left eye, 0.7 in the right eye, elevated pressures, thin corneas, advanced field loss. This patient, this patient presented late, so the OCT helped us to confirm the diagnosis. But the point for this example is that when you have such severe thinning, then you really do not need an OCT to follow it up. You just need to treat the patient with progressive visual fields, and of course treat this particular patient very aggressively. The left eye was taken up for surgery. Now this is the next slide, 0.6 cupping in the right eye at 0.4 in the left eye. We assumed that this was more physiological, but we had a field defect. And this is again an important indication for an OCT, where it helps us to confirm whether this field defect is an artifact or a learning curve error. So once the OCT was almost normal, we decided not yet to treat this patient, but to keep him on follow-up and just to repeat that visual field by about 3 to 4 months. Another example, a lady with cupping 6.6 in both the eyes, pressures and CCT were in the normal range. Now remember, OCT is not completely foolproof. So here, even though the fields were normal, surprise, surprise, the OCT was abnormal. So we went back to check what our findings showed, and we found that even alone, the OCT can be erroneous also. So do not make a diagnosis purely on OCT. You will have to go back and recheck our findings. Another example of cupping where we thought this could be physiological. The fields were okay. And however, this patient had a temporal thinning, and this patient, so we did not tell her she was completely okay. We said, you just have early loss. Since the pressures are right now okay, we will monitor you for risk factors, but we would still keep her on follow-up. So you have this whole gamut of scenarios that can happen, and OCT has to be done keeping our clinical findings as well as the other tests in mind. So there are artifacts, red disease, as we just saw. We could identify high myopes as mistakenly abnormal. Green disease, where focal areas, when thinned, are average, and you could be missing out areas of focal loss. Signal quality we've covered, depends on the machine. So for the OptiView, a scan strength, a signal strength of more than 40 is better. For the Cirrus, more than 6 is acceptable. The ring being concentric with the disc is important, and often with cataract we might get thinner RNFL, so it's a good idea to repeat the scans after the cataract surgery is done. Before I finish, a quick word about anterior segment OCT. The landmark that is important is the schival spur, and it is usually done for patients with angle closure glaucoma who have a shallow AC depth and a shorter axial length. I don't have much time, I'll go through this quickly. These are the parameters we look at. You can actually visualize a closed angle right up to the Schwalbe's line, a membrane which was persisting after a YAG laser, and this was then realized in a second sitting. This is important. You see, a gonioscopy, because of the focal light that we throw, often narrows the pupil and opens up an angle which was potentially occludable or narrow in scotopic conditions. So here we can visualize in both in scotopic as well as photopic areas where the angle is actually falsely appearing as open. Another word about OCT angiography for glaucoma. We know that glaucoma affects the vessel density in the peripapillary and the macular area. So this is an additional advantage that we have with the OCT angio. The vessel density loss acts as an additional marker even before the visual field loss. And the vessel density loss, they will then correlate with the visual field loss in subsequent time periods. So it can also be used to monitor progression. Some examples here. So this is a normal peripapillary OCT angiography. And you see in moderate areas, we're seeing areas of loss and microvascular dropout. And this is for the macular area. You can see that in subsequent scans, these darker areas are increasing. Also, you can use it to compare the two eyes. So this patient had a normal right eye and an eye which had early glaucoma, but when we repeated the scan after 1 year, the areas of microvascular dropout were even more. Just the last slide, sir. So OCT angiography has increased our evaluation potential with the OCT, and widen the spectrum both for the pre-perimetric as well as for the later glaucomas. In fact, it reaches a floor effect at a more advanced disease stage than purely the RNFL and GCC. So it is a useful modality for glaucoma diagnosis. However, remember to evaluate the scan data and not just the color codes. It is a good idea to repeat an OCT if you are taking a treatment decision based purely on OCT. But remember, an OCT cannot detect disc pallor or disc hemorrhages, so still needs a clinical exam for confirmation of glaucoma. So the triad that I began with my presentation, the eye pressure, the optic nerve cupping, and the visual field, has OCT as a very essential tool, a fourth dimension to glaucoma diagnosis. And in recent times, we find that OCT is not only giving us information via the RNFL and the ONH and the GCC, but that the anterior segment OCT as well as OCT angiography has really increased the role of OCT for glaucoma. So I see an enhanced role of OCT for glaucoma in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Charu. That was beautiful. And I think that puts it in perspective for all our viewers. Tell me, so can I say that, number one, once this OCT shows that the readings are all red, I don't need to keep on repeating this OCT, no? In that, that means the significance.
That's correct. I said that 3 times. I said that in 3 different examples, that once we have advanced loss,
so we do not need it. Then it's okay. I mean, we know it's already gone. The second thing is, supposing you have a patient who's got early changes on OCT, corresponding changes on the fields. Now, what should he use for doing his follow-up? Both? Only OCT? Only fields?
So if we have put the patient on treatment, I would do a visual field 6 monthly to annually, and I would do an OCT in about 2 years, or unless I find something really unusual happening, that his visual field has really gone bad, or sometimes it has really improved, so was the earlier one an artifact. So I would repeat the visual fields for a patient who's on treatment and doing well, under control. I would repeat the visual fields by about 6 months to annually, and an OCT in about 1 to 2 years if he's stable, maybe
OCT
2 years.
is less frequent. I thought, like in retina, we say har mahine kar lo. So doing a say 3 monthly OCT will not.
Like I said, so if he's under control, if he's not progressing, and if he's stable,
Yeah.
right, his pressures are okay, his visual fields are stable, because eventually we are going to monitor the patient for his visual field loss, and a little bit of variation, you know, a 5 micron or a 4 micron dip can happen even when you repeat the scan on the same day. So those short-term fluctuations are far more frequent in your OCT, and unless you are doing a trend-based or an event-based analysis, I would not change my treatment purely if the OCT thinning, let's say from 94 microns has gone down to 92. Significant RNFL loss is about 75.
So, you know, for example, OCT takes 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Fields will take half an hour. So if you say, well, you can do your OCTs every 3 months, and if there's something happening, then you do the fields. So fields can be 6 months or even longer.
Well, I would still beg to disagree, sir. Because
No, I'm not. I'm asking you. I'm not telling you.
So what I know, in all these years, what I've always done is do a visual fields more frequently. Like I said, 6 monthly to annually visual fields. If the OCT is fine, if the patient is well controlled, I have everything under control. Then, like I said, even a small
If you don't have it under control.
If I don't have it under control, and yes, I'm getting a visual field which is changing, then I would do an OCT annually. I would
So
not.
the OCT for you is only an adjunctive treatment to confirm what you're seeing on the fields, not the other way around.
And the role is more pronounced in pre-perimetric glaucoma and early glaucoma. Once I have an established glaucoma who is under treatment, then I'm going to base my treatment ideally on the pressure or the visual fields. If I'm having a pressure which is not getting controlled, and I put the patient on medical treatment, I'm then going to take him up for surgery, irrespective of the OCT.
So one last question. If you have a patient who's got, say, a pressure of 24, and the OCT shows early change in that eye, early change, right?
Okay.
So would you put the patient on treatment if the fields are normal?
Yes, I'll show this slide to you. So I will then evaluate the risk factors that this patient has. And now, I in fact had it included, but I was exceeding the time. If this patient, let's say, is diabetic, and he's going to need multiple intravitreal injections, which is what really happens in clinical scenarios, so we don't have isolated patients. Let's say his cornea is 490, okay? His pressure is 24. His visual field is showing very early changes, but the OCT is definitely going to show me changes. I will put this patient on treatment because this 24 is only going to get worse. He has a thinner cornea. He's going to need injections. I'd rather keep his IOP under control. On the other hand, just the 24, the corneal thickness is a good 550. He has no other risk factors as a young patient. Maybe I'll just monitor him 3 to 4 monthly.
Okay. So that actually dilutes the role. I mean, overall, you're diluting the role of the OCT a little bit over time.
OCT is adjuvant still. I would not, like I said, make a treatment decision purely based on OCT. I would look at the disc. I would look at the fields. I would look at the risk factors. And yes, for us, even with all these tools, even with the OCT angiography and the other modalities that we have now, we look so much more at the GCC. I would hesitate to put somebody on treatment purely on an OCT because, again, it's a lifelong treatment with its own risk of side effects. So yes, I would give a lot of emphasis to the entire picture.
All right. So I think you're a little conservative with the OCTs, and maybe we need to investigate this a little more than this, because ultimately it's the time that the patient saves by using it. And maybe if we can use OCT more frequently than the fields, we could, at least in early glaucoma, make things a little different. Thank you very much, Charu. I really appreciate your being here and being a part of the session. If there are any questions at the end, we'll take them up further. So far, I saw there was nothing in the question and answer box. And now I'm going to invite Dr. Hemlata to please join us. Dr. Hemlata is also one of our consultants at Center for Sight. She's in fact one of our main cataract surgery consultants, and she's one of the best cataract surgeons we have in the Center for Sight. So I'm going to ask her to talk about anterior segment OCT, and she's also, incidentally, a refractive surgeon. So it's not just she's a cataract surgeon, she's also a refractive surgeon. So I'm going to ask her to discuss about anterior segment OCT in cornea and refractive surgery. Over to you, Hemlata.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I visible, sir? My slides are visible?
Yes, your slides are visible.
All right. A very good afternoon to all of you. I'll be talking about anterior segment OCT used in day-to-day cornea and refractive surgery practice. So first of all, I would like you to know that majorly the anterior segment OCT systems are categorized into two types. One that are converted from the retinal scanners, and the other ones that are dedicated anterior segment OCT systems. The systems that are converted from retinal scanners, they use the wavelength of 830 nanometers and provide us with a very high axial resolution, as compared to these dedicated anterior segment OCT systems that use the wavelength of 1310 nanometers and provide us with the deeper and wider scans. Now, if we are using retinal scanners to image the anterior segment, you need to use adapter lenses that comes as a separate attachment from the company. And then you can visualize the different areas like anterior chamber angle or cornea, depending on which kind of lens you're using. So you can visualize beautifully the cornea, all the layers of the cornea, starting from tear film to Descemet membranes and endothelium. And coming on to the clinical applications of ASOCT, we can use the ASOCT to assess the corneal thickness, opacity, to evaluate the pre-surgical and post-surgical anterior segment anatomy. It is used in guided laser assisted cataract surgery to image the intracorneal ring segments, to see the position and wall size of the phakic IOLs, and there are many more indications I'll be showing in clinical cases. So keratoconus can be diagnosed on ASOCT based upon 3 or 4 criteria in the central pachymetry map. This is how a patient of keratoconus looks like on anterior segment OCT, where you see thinning of the cornea and altered superior inferior temporal ratio. And it also gives us progression maps if you want to monitor the progression of the disease. Epithelial mapping is a newer concept, which is based upon the concept that the epithelium gets remodeled in response to the underlying stromal surface irregularities. So in the areas of the valleys, it gets thickened, and where the stroma protrudes, there is epithelial thinning. So we are basically looking at the central and the regional epithelial thickness profiles. There is inferior thinning corresponding to the thinnest cornea. And it is very useful to detect the early cases of keratoconus, PMCT, and early detection of corneal ectasia. Now, even before there are changes in epithelium surface, Bowman, there's disintegration of the Bowman's layer, which can be seen as inferior thinning on the high resolution OCT scan. So this is how OCT helps us to see the demarcation line post C3R procedure. This demarcation line usually appears after a month after the procedure, and this correlates directly with the effectiveness of the treatment. So OCT is also useful to assess the position and depth of the intacs. Now, post-operatively, many times it happens that this is stromal melting, and sometimes we need to explant the intacs. So before explanting, if we do the anterior segment OCT to see what is the depth of the intacs, how much stromal thinning is there overlying in the area of the intacs, it is useful in the management of the case. Also, higher resolution OCT allows you to better visualize the LASIK flap. Almost whole extent of the LASIK flap can be visualized. You can measure the thickness of the flap. You can see, look at the residual stromal thickness. And it is also useful in PTK planning. Suppose you have a scar in the cornea and you want to treat the residual refractive error. So first of all, you need to know the depth of the scar. So I'll just show you a clinical case. This was a 32-year-old male patient who presented to us with post-LASIK corneal scar. LASIK was done somewhere else, so we didn't know that what is the depth of the scar, what kind of keratome was used. And the patient had refractive error of -2 diopters with -1 cylinder. Now, before planning any redo surgery, so we always do anterior segment OCT in such cases. As you can very clearly see that this scar is involving almost whole of the flap, but there is residual stromal thickness of 257 microns. So it is not possible just to treat the scar. So we decided to amputate the flap, and you can see that the overall corneal thickness is 404 microns. There are very, very minimal scar that is left. So that improved patients' visual symptoms like glare and halo, especially the night vision. So an OCT evaluation of the residual stromal bed and flap can predict the potential safety of the redo surgeries. So before all kind of redo surgeries, I highly recommend to do anterior segment OCT for all the patients, because it can visualize plaque even after years of refractive surgery. Now, this is a patient who presented to us with refractive error of 1.75 diopters and wanted redo surgery. So we did anterior segment OCT to see that what kind of procedure we can do for this patient. The residual stromal bed in this case was 265 microns, which is insufficient to treat the refractive error of 1.75 diopter if you relift the plaque. So we decided to do surface ablation with MMC for this patient, and he was happy after surgery. Now, this is a very interesting case of epithelial ingrowth. So if you look at the slit lamp examination, do this slit lamp examination, you see a desquamated epithelial cyst with milky appearance in the periphery. Now, whether it is to be removed or we can keep it under observation, that is the question. Now, we do the anterior segment OCT, and on OCT, you can see that the extent and depth of the epithelial ingrowth was much more than what it was seen on slit lamp. And also along with that, there is overlying melting of the flap in the area of epithelial ingrowth. So this patient, this epithelial ingrowth had to be removed surgically. So most of the cornea surgeons these days do anterior segment OCT in routine to look at the health of the dissect graft. Like in this image, you can see that it is taken after day 3. So the interior, the corneal thickness is more. There's a little corneal edema still present, but the graft is very well attached. This is another case where day 1 patient presented with corneal edema. The visibility was not that great on slit lamp examination. ASOCT was done, and you can see that in the bottom picture that the graft was detached almost throughout. So rebubbling was done, and in the top picture, you can see that the graft is very well attached and there is resolution of the corneal edema. So now almost 14% of the DM detachments are actually picked up on anterior segment OCT. And the reason is that on day 1, if there is significant corneal edema because of the DM detachment, we are not able to see whether the detachment is there or not, what is the extent of detachment, and whether it is linear or non-linear, on which our management will depend. For example, in this patient, in the bottom picture, you can see that there is a large corneal DM detachment with significant corneal edema. So we just, as this patient was picked up on day 1 only, we just injected air in the anterior chamber, and next day the patient was having clear cornea with reattachment of the descending membrane. This is another interesting case of capsular bag distension syndrome, in which you can see that the fluid sequestration is there between the IOL and the posterior capsule. So sometimes if the fluid is milky, you are not able to see where the posterior capsule is because of the haze that is there. So in these cases, even a single shot of YAG caps can, the fluid which is there that actually goes into the vitreous cavity, and the patient's myopic shift actually improves, and there is improvement in the final visual. So another recent advancement in the ophthalmology is the introduction of the femtosecond laser-assisted cataract surgery, in which we have real-time OCT integrated into the machine, so which gives us the detailed anterior segment anatomy. So like you see in this particular patient, you have the posterior polar cataract and PC defect is clearly visible. So intraoperative OCT is something new. In this particular patient, you can see that there is a PC defect in the center. This was a case of posterior polar cataract with PC defect. Intraoperative OCT showed herniation of the vitreous, forward herniation of the vitreous into the anterior chamber with intact hyaloid base. So that could be pushed back into the vitreous just with the help of viscoelastic device. And we did not need to do the anterior vitrectomy. So also we can see the size of the vault size of the ICL, which is the distance between the posterior surface of the ICL and anterior surface of the crystalline lens. If there is a low vault, then that predisposes the patient to the cataract formation, and a higher vault can lead to glaucoma formation. And this was a case where actually the ICL went upside down. So this was inverted ICL, which was actually picked up on segment OCT. And then we removed the ICL and re-injected into the right position. So these are some of the other applications like IOL power calculation, tear film meniscus measurements, and it can be used for the limit. There are so many indications, and I still feel that its anterior segment OCT is highly underutilized. So we can pick up a lot of findings. Anterior segment OCT is a powerful, innovative tool for pre and post-operative assessment of the cornea and refractive surgery patients. And newer technologies such as high resolution, ultra high resolution OCT or intraoperative OCT allow more precise visualization of the anterior segment structures that can improve our ability to diagnose and treat corneal disorders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hemlata. I think that gives a good perspective of how versatile the OCT can be for anterior segment. So now, is this part of a routine workup of your patients when you're doing anterior segment work for refractive work, or is that?
Still, it is not a part of our routine workup, but it is a part of our all enhancement procedures. Whenever we do and see any patient who comes for the redo surgeries, or there is any visible corneal opacity that can interfere with our management, in all those patients, anterior segment OCT is must.
Okay. So for a general ophthalmologist who's seeing corneal opacities and not really doing refractive surgery, is there any role which an anterior segment OCT can have?
So not for the opacity management. Yes, if you are doing refractive surgery, if you want to, I mean, all the general ophthalmologists are also doing cataract surgeries. Yeah. There comes the role when you have DM detachments. Also, these are very common complications, and sometimes it's not possible to see the DM detachment because of the corneal haze. So in those patients, actually anterior segment OCT has a role. Otherwise, if you are not doing refractive surgery, it doesn't give you much advantage in routine practice.
So the major role comes in refractive surgery, and an ancillary role in terms of corneal problems at the level of the endothelium. So whether it's endothelium, exactly. Whether it's a detachment, Descemet's detachment occurring following a cataract surgery, or any other place where you want to evaluate the Descemet.
Exactly.
So, Adia, is there anyone else who would like to ask any questions from our panel? I mean, since I don't see any questions coming from our viewers, there are no open questions in this chat box. So I also welcome any questions from any of the people who are there. And otherwise, if you don't have any questions right now, you can ponder over them, keep them ready, and maybe we can take them up at the end of the session. Towards the end of the session also. So we now have, after this, we have now Dr. Purnima Sood, who is working in MMI-Tech in Delhi. She is a senior vitreoretinal surgeon, and she also works in Max Hospital, Gurgaon, and JP Hospital in Noida. And she is going to first tell us about OCT in posterior segment disorders. And the first, we are going to divide this into two parts. First, she's going to talk about the normal OCT, the various layers which are there, and the clinical relevance of all these. And then in the second part of this, we will discuss what are the various conditions and how does OCT occur or show up in those conditions. So over to Purnima for the normal OCT, various layers, and their clinical segments.
Good afternoon, everyone. Are my slides, is it seen, visible?
Yeah, they are seen.
Okay. So first, I would like to thank Dr. Talwar for giving me this opportunity. So I'll be talking about how to read a normal retinal OCT, what do we see, and how to read them. So as we all know, the OCT is a tomogram of black and white, and it's only colored with false colors. And it is possible because of the varied reflections from the different retinal layers. Now, whenever we see a OCT image, we do two types of analysis, a qualitative and a quantitative. Qualitative analysis means we assess all the layers, their structure, any changes from the normal, and we also see the reflectivity studies, any kind of hypo or hyperreflectivity, which is very important. For the quantitative analysis, we see the overall thickness and volume of the retinal layers, and that tells us what is the status of the various layers. Now, these are the different scans that are usually done. A line scan appears like this across and on single, but they have good resolution. But the disadvantage is that the area seen is very limited. So the preferred scans are a raster or a radial. The raster has parallel horizontal scans of high resolution, while the radial scans are lines passing through the fovea at regular equal angles. So the advantages with both of them is that they are able to pick up even very small lesions which may be missed otherwise. So there are just a few examples where you can see the radial and the raster. Now coming to the normal retinal OCT, we see the fovea as a depression, and the anterior and the posterior most boundaries are very well defined because of high reflectivity from the vitreoretinal interface as well as the RPE. These are the various layers of the retina, and this is a histopathological correlation. Now coming to the color interpretation, the layers which reflect very strongly, they appear as red or orange, and these include the ILM layer, the nerve fiber layer, as well as the RPE layer, while the layers with medium reflectivity are greenish, and these include the two plexiform layers as well as the inner and outer segment of photoreceptors. While the layers with the weak reflectivity, they appear black or blue, black being the vitreous and blue are the nuclear layers. Now, whenever we see an OCT image, we first of all look at the quality, then the position of the scan, as well as then we assess the different layers. In the quality, we have to look whether we are seeing the outer and the inner band clearly, and the good signal to noise ratio, as well as any abnormal profiles. Now here you can see in the first, some parts are not clearly seen, but this is because of the shadowing effect of the membrane in front. While here you see there's overall it's not a good signal noise ratio, and this is because of any media opacity like cataract. Here you see some abnormalities. Sometimes they're not due to actual problem, but because of some artifacts. So here there's a gap here, and here there's some movement. The gap is due to eye blinking, while this undulated waves is seen because of the eye movement. So how can we differentiate? By correlating with the fundus picture as well as repeating the scan. Then comes the position. Are we really seeing through the fovea? Because otherwise we get a false impression. So if the patient is not able to fix on the central fixation, we can always use the fixation in the other eye. Now coming to the actual assessment of the layers, we divide it into these regions. So there's a pre-retinal, epiretinal, intraretinal, and the subretinal or the sub-RP. These are the terms which we use to describe the changes like thickening, thinning, elevation, depression. The pre-retinal region is black because vitreous is translucent, but sometimes we may see hyperreflective areas like this. There's a membrane here, which we're seeing, and a PVD membrane here. The second picture shows a diffuse hyperreflectivity in the vitreous, indicating some kind of vitreous hemorrhage. The epiretinal area is usually very smooth, regular, and highly reflective, but it may become irregular because of presence of some abnormality, like in this case, an epiretinal membrane. These are some other changes which we can see in the epiretinal region, adhesion of a membrane or a traction leading to vitreomacular traction. Here, the traction is lifting up the whole retina. And sometimes we even see altered foveal contour because of the presence of, like in this case, this was an NBE which was present at the foveal margin. Now coming to the next layer, that is the intraretinal changes. Here, reflectivity patterns are very important, hypo and hyper. And then we look at the thickening, thinning, and the integrity of the layers. Now, whenever we see hyporeflectivity, this usually indicates fluid or edema. Now, we have to look at the pattern of this hyperreflectivity. If it is diffuse, we call it a diffuse macular edema. And if it is cystic spaces, then it's a cystic macular edema. But all hyperreflective areas are not edema. So sometimes retinal atrophy, the cells of the retina, and they may atrophy and lead to this kind of a picture. Hyperreflectivity, you can see here the hyperreflective lesions in the outer retinal layers. This is due to new vesicular membrane in the AMD cases. Very highly reflective intraretinal lesions may be seen in some cases because of hard exudates, and they even cause shadowing. Then we look at the thickening, overall thickness of the retina. Here you can see there's increase in thickness because of the edema. And in the second one, there is a thinning because of the overall atrophy of the retinal layers. Present or not? Here you can see there's a complete loss of retinal layers in the center leading to a macular hole. And sometimes you may see a partial loss of retinal layers. So this is a lamellar macular hole. Then comes finally the subretinal or the sub-RPE region. Here the reflectivity patterns again we see and the RPE layer. Here hyporeflectivity indicating the fluid is important in relation to the RPE layer. If the fluid is above the RPE, then it is a subretinal fluid. And if the fluid is below the RPE, then it becomes a PED, a pigment epithelial detachment. The RPE layer is very important. So these are again the terms which we use to describe it. These are the various changes you can see: undulation, disruption, thickening. It's very important because many times it's the RPE layer which gives us a clue to the possible diagnosis. Now I'll just illustrate. You see a case here where there's subretinal fluid, there's intraretinal cystic fluid, similar case with intraretinal cystic edema. But are these two the same? No, not really, because if you look at the RPE here, in the second one, it is elevated and irregular, indicating that these two are entirely different conditions. Similar, just another illustration. This case, you see there is subretinal fluid, and another case with similar subretinal fluid. But if you look at the RPE layer, it is normal in this, and here it's undulated, and there is a PED also, indicating that this is a case of AMD, while the first is just a case of CSR. So this is the importance of RPE layer. Then coming to the final quantitative analysis, which we do with the 3D scan. Here we see the overall thickness and volume of the retina. This is important because this helps us in mapping the progression of the disease as well as seeing the effect of the therapeutic intervention. Finally, I would just like to say that we should be very familiar with the retinal anatomy as well as the OCT features of the different diseases. And we should always have a systematic approach to evaluating all the OCT images. And main important thing is to correlate it with the fundus picture, the history, as well as the sign and the symptoms. Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima. We'll now start off with the second part of this, which is about the OCT abnormalities in various disorders. She's given you a good basic working understanding of the way OCT changes occur in various retinal conditions. And after we now discuss about the various conditions, the OCT changes in various disorders, the last part will be about OCT angio, which is a new technique for using OCT for seeing the vasculature of the eye. So now I'm going to start off with my lecture. So the screen is visible? Yeah, so okay. And incidentally, I want the others to also participate in the discussion regarding other lectures. If anyone has any questions to any of the panelists, we can do that after the next two lectures are over. So let's come to OCT abnormalities in various retinal disorders and what is the significance of those. So it's quite evident to you that OCT is the bedrock on which management of retinal disorders is anchored for diagnosis and also for follow-up. And that's how it's important for us for virtually every retinal condition. So the abnormalities that we see can help us in making the diagnosis, the treatment, the follow-up, and the prognostication. Let's start off with the condition straight away. OCT in macular degeneration, age-related macular degeneration. There are two aspects to it: the drusen and the geographic atrophy in dry ARMD, and the exudative changes, which could be either type 1, type 2, or type 3, but the occult CNVs, classic CNVs, or the retinal angiomatous proliferations. Now, what you see over here, the undulations of this RPE, these are basically because of drusen, and these are a sign of dry ARMD. No active, if there's no fluid over there, this is not active CNV at the moment. So just needs to be followed regularly. Nothing else needs to be done. Now you see what happened over a period of time. This intact ELM, external limiting membrane, ISOS junction, the RPE layers, now they've been disrupted over here. The external limiting membrane has disrupted, the ISOS junction and the corresponding outer segment, inner segments are disrupted, and the RPE is also disrupted. So basically, as a result of that, what happens? The outer nuclear layer has collapsed. So this is an outer nuclear atrophy, basically has occurred, and this is nascent geographic atrophy. This is a dry ARMD. On the other hand, here what you have CNVM because of ARMD. The type 1s are under the RP. You see a retinal pigment epithelial detachment over here. Of course, there's also subretinal fluid over here, but the lesion, the basic lesion is under the RPE over here. In the type 2 lesions, you have the lesion above the retina, above the RPE. So this is a classic lesion, also now called type 2 CNVMs. Then comes type 3 CNVMs. What is happening here? You see in the retinal substance, there is a lesion which is growing into the under the RPE and then causing an RPE detachment. So this is a type 3 CNVM, a very small retinal angiomatous proliferation is seen over here in this lesion, and it's just about breaking the RPE over here. So this is the various types of CNVM, and you can also help to prognosticate, you follow up, as you will see here. Now, this was a type 2 CNVM. This patient had this is an old OCT, patient got PDT, and you can see how with the treatment, this CNVM has vanished. There's only a little more intensification of the RPE level. That means there's probably a little RPE hypertrophy occurring there, but the entire lesion has vanished. So you can use it for follow-up of your patients of classic CNVM. Similarly, you see over here, this is an occult CNVM. There's an RPE detachment in subretinal fluid. And following treatment, the RPE detachment has become much more shallower and the subretinal fluid has disappeared. And then over time, you'll see intraretinal cystic cavities have come. These intraretinal cystic cavities are a sign of recurrence. The RPE detachment is much less, but there is a recurrence which has happened, indicating that the patient now needs treatment. Intraretinal fluid is almost always treated. So you can make your initial diagnosis, you can follow up, and then you can pick up the recurrences also. This is a patient who had a serous RPE detachment. You see, it's clear RPE detachment, very bullous, was followed up, and then you can see at this time the fovea is normal. This is extrafoveal. And then over a period of time, what do you see over here? There's a rip here. This had been treated before, but this is a rip over here. You see the RPE is coming up to this level, and then there's a discontinuity, and there's subretinal fluid. So this is a sign of a RPE rip. Incidentally, even if an RPE rip occurs, the patient would still need to be treated for this disease process. Now you have a patient and he has some cystic cavities or so-called cystic cavities. But look carefully, this is not a cyst because of activity. This is an outer retinal tubulation. This is basically the RPE forms this kind of a wheel around, and there's a central area of fluid. This is a sign of a severe degenerative change, not an indication for treatment. So this is the other important thing that you need to manage. Now let's need to know about. Now let's come to central serous chorioretinopathy. Again, you have a neurosensory detachment over here, but you have a small RPE detachment from where the leaflets are happening. So you know that this is in the acute stage. Many of them will conservatively improve. Sometimes they will need to be treated. Now you come to the chronic CSR. This is chronic central serous chorioretinopathy. And what do you see? You see a brush border sign over here. You see these irregularities at the level of the outer segments. So these are waste products accumulation at the level of the photoreceptor outer segments on the outer surface of the retina. So this is a sign of chronicity. Now let's come to other things. What else can help you to make a diagnosis of CSIR? If you do enhanced depth imaging, you can pick up that the choroid is very thickened. You can see that the choroid is very thickened in this patient, and a presence of thickened choroid with fluid is a sign that you're dealing with a central serous retinopathy. But sometimes you can have this central serous retinopathy, and yet this is not CSR. This is a dome-shaped maculopathy. This is a myopic patient, and if you see this kind of dome kind of appearance, it's not there in all the quadrants. It may be there in one quadrant, may not be there in the other quadrant, as in this patient. In the vertical quadrant, it's not there. In the horizontal quadrant, you see there's this huge dome. This is a dome-shaped maculopathy and is not the same thing as, this is not a CNVM, and this is not a CSR either. Polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, I said, is a variant of ARMD. And here, if you have a patient who has excessive exudation of a lot of hemorrhages, when you see a picture that looks like this, that means there are peaked PEDs, high PEDs. No, this is called a tomahawk sign. Actually, this is a because of the high PED with shallow undulating PED adjacent to it. And if you look carefully at this shallow adjacent PED, you see there's another layer within it, which is called the double layer sign. This is suggestive of a branching vascular network within that lesion. And so this picture is characteristic of a PCV, a polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. At the same time, sometimes there are some mimics, like what you see over here. This looks like a type 2 CNVM, but actually this is amorphous material. If you do an angiogram, you find that it's not increasing in hyperfluorescence. If you see the autofluorescence, it shows as a autofluorescent area. And that is your clue that you're dealing with adult vitelliform degeneration. This is not to be treated, doesn't need any require any treatment. And this, on the other hand, is a patient who has, if you see the fluorescein angiogram, it looks like a late leakage from an unknown source. But this, if you see carefully at the OCT, this space over here, there is no abnormality in the RPE. There is no lesion at the level of the RPE. This is actually a juxtafoveal telangiectasia, and this is degenerated fluid. In this case, there is also a small epiretinal membrane that has happened, but otherwise this doesn't need any. We don't treat this unless these patients develop a choroidal neovascularization. Incidentally, we have a lot of time, so that is why I have progressed a little slowly. We can complete this lecture. So I'm just going to take a little more time. So let's see other things which can happen. Now, a blunting of the foveal contour in this OCT is because of a membrane here, epiretinal membrane, which Purnima also showed you. And this, if it is causing vision loss, is you consider for treatment. Now you see this, there was a complete discontinuity. This is a macular hole, and this is post-treatment. You find the macular hole has resolved. Now, what can help you to decide whether this macular hole surgery will be successful? The hole form factor, that means you see the walls, the side walls, and you do the ratio of the side walls to the base. And if this is around 0.9 or more, the chances are that the hole will settle. Of course, I think in Narayan Netralaya, they've done many other parameters and to analyze the prognosis of the macular hole surgery. But this is a basic way of judging. If there's too much distance between the holes, between the two parts of the two walls of the hole, then the chance of success go down. The bigger the hole, the lesser the success rates. Now, sometimes this is what is very important. Now we come to a very important thing for cataract surgeons. Macular hole was one. Supposing you have a patient who's not improved following surgery, please do the OCT. You hope you don't have a macular hole there, which is responsible, or you may have cystoid macular edema. If you have cystoid macular edema, this is going to respond very well to medical treatment. And so it's important to be able to diagnose it and treat it properly with NSAIDs and steroids if required. Now we come to vascular disorders, the last group of disorders today. If you have which you can have arterial and venous disorders. Let's see what do they look like. So this is a patient who has a CRO. And what does the CRO show up in the OCT like? In the OCT, what you get is an opacification of the inner retinal layers. You see this? The inner retinal layers are opacified. The outer retinal layers are spared. This is a classic diagnosis of a CRO. Or if it was a BRAO, it will be only in one side, maybe the superior or the inferior, and not the entire retina. With time, once it heals, once it starts resolving, the patient, this opacification will go away, but some retinal thinning will be left at the end. So this is how you make a diagnosis. Now, the other important thing is CRVO. If you have CRVO, on the other hand, the patient has macular edema, increased retinal thickness, there could be subretinal fluid, intraretinal cystic cavities, but they are usually confined to the macular area. And you can see, you can use this also for assessing response. Following treatment became better, then got a recurrence, again was treated, and you can see how he is responding to pharmacotherapy. So it's very important to use OCT for following up your patients after you made your initial diagnosis. On the other hand, if this was a BRVO, what would be the difference? BRVO, you can actually, if you see the vertical scan, either the superior retina or the inferior retina will show increased thickness and increased retinal and intraretinal cystic spaces, maybe even some hyperreflective dots, but they are not going to cross the midline, and that is pathognomonic. When you have edema localized to one side, not crossing over to the midline at all, you know you're dealing with a BRVO, most probably. And again, you use the OCT for seeing whether the patient is responding. As long as he's responding, you treat. Once it becomes okay, you don't need to treat any further. So you can also use this for following up your patients. In diabetic macular edema, again, you use it for diagnosis and for management. For example, you see this patient, there is an epiretinal membrane, there is edema over here, and there is over here in the lower slide, you have a vitreomacular traction. In both, the fluorescein angiographic picture may give you a diffuse diabetic macular edema, but this requires surgery when there is traction. And if it's only a membrane with associated edema, it needs medical treatment. And you'll only treat the ERM if you believe this is the cause of the edema. In maculopathy, in diabetic maculopathy, there are also certain important biomarkers like DRIL, subretinal fluid, intraretinal changes, the outer limiting membrane, and the photoreceptor layer integrity, and hyperreflective dots. So let's see this. See, in general, you have a patient who's got edema, a little bit of neurosensory detachment, you're giving injections, for example, following up, and you can see now that the subretinal fluid is gone, intraretinal cystic cavity is gone. If the vision is okay, you know you don't need to give any more treatment. So you can follow up your patients with OCT very, very accurately. In some patients, you may find the vision is not improving, or you want to prognosticate. You see, you look at this small layer above, or on the other side, on both sides, you can see all the layers, you can distinguish them. But in this small area, there is an inability to distinguish the boundaries of the ganglion cell layer and the inner plexiform layer and the inner nuclear layers. Now, when you reach this, when you see this point, this is what we call DRIL. This is disorganization of the retinal inner layers. And this is a prognostic indicator that this patient may not get much vision improvement, even following intervention. We normally look for this in the central 1,000 to 3,000 micron and look for the extent of these changes to decide what is going on. The other important thing is subretinal fluid, what you see over here. This is a biomarker for better visual outcome. Patients who have subretinal fluid generally seem to do better following treatment. Absence of hyperreflective spots. What you see over here, these small dot-like things, these are hyperreflective spots. And to be sure, you must have a color photograph showing that there are no hard exudates in that region. Hard exudates are not the same thing as Hard exudates show up also on the OCT, but hyperreflective spots don't show up in the color photograph. So you know you're dealing with hyperreflective spots, and their absence is a good prognostic indicator. And we will also discuss about the ISOS junction. Now, presence of subretinal fluid, absence of hyperreflective spots, and in a complete integrity of the ISOS junction, these are all predictive of better outcome following treatment. And there's a study which was done in dexamethasone implants, which showed that this was good. And the predictive value did not vary whether they were treatment naive DME patients, but the vision response was better than in refractive eyes. Now here you see two eyes, both have lot of cystic cavities, but in this one you have an intact ISOS junction and intact and partly intact external limiting membrane. Visual prognosis was good. Here they were all disrupted and the patient did not do well. This is a patient who had an epiretinal membrane, also a vitreoschitic membrane. You can even see those layers of vitreoscheises in the OCT. And in this patient following a vitreoretinal surgery, you can see there was a good recovery. And this was one-eyed patient who did well following surgery. So OCT can help you to see how your patient is doing, predict, as well as tell you when more treatment is needed. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, OCT is the workhorse for diagnosis of retinal disorders. It's non-invasive, sensitive, provides detailed insights into the pathoanatomic changes occurring in the retinal microarchitecture, and has really revolutionized the management of retinal disorders. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I think first we can have the lecture from Dr. Naresh Yadav, and then if there are any questions, we will answer those questions. Dr. Naresh Yadav is the head of vitreoretinal services at Narayan Nethralaya in Bengaluru. He is a very renowned surgeon, a very good clinician, as well as a researcher. And I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to tell us about OCT action. Thanks, sir.
A very good afternoon to one and all. I will be speaking on OCT angiography, what all can it show. So we all know that FFA ICG is the gold standard to visualize the retinal vasculature, but it's an invasive procedure and you cannot do it in all patients, and it has some well-documented side effects. It takes time and it's a two-dimensional. So vascular segmentation is not possible. In OCTA, it's a dialysis procedure. It is very quick, it's repeatable, and you get segmentation of the vasculature that is possible. So basically, these are the 4 slabs that you get in OCTA: superficial capillary plexus, deep capillary plexus, outer retina, and the choroid capillary. The other beauty is that all these depth encoded slabs come co-registered with the structural OCT B-scan. So this is the only machine which gives you the structural OCT B-scans also, along with the information about the vasculature also. So basically now we'll look at a few sort of where it is useful. So here you can see there's a NVD, it's a case of PDR, and you can see in the periphery, there's a exuberant vascular proliferation. The small caliber vessels are profusely growing in the periphery. So this is given a term as exuberant vascular proliferation. And with treatment, you can see there are only a few mature vessels are seen. This exuberant growth is not visible. So this could be very useful in deciding retreatment. So when to do more laser, when to give anti-VEGF, it could be useful. And sometimes if the fundus is tessellated in between the laser scar, picking up the NVE can be difficult. So there the OCTA can be very useful. So you'll have to scan the entire area, but definitely it will pick up the new vessels. The other thing is the OCTA in DME. So we know that it is useful to look at the perfusion status of the macula. And the other uses could be that we need to concentrate on the superficial capillary plexus at the DCP. So the SCP affection will cause more amount of drill, and the DCP more relates to the FAZ. And anti-VEGF non-responders have significantly lower vascular flow density and larger FAZ in DCP. So it has a prognostic value also. And the baseline DCP perfusion is associated with long-term visual outcomes. So studies have shown that. So we need to concentrate more on that. And similarly, the microaneurysms, if they are more in the DCP, these patients also may not respond very well. So this is an important correlation. So this yellow line that you see is the outer plexiform layer. So on the left side, the outer plexiform layer is intact. And you can see the superficial and the deep capillary plexus, there are no non-flow areas. So such patients are going to respond good with anti-VEGF. On the other side, if you see, the OPL is disturbed. So wherever the OPL is disturbed, in that particular area, you see non-flow area in the DCP. So there's a good correlation of the DCP and the OPL disruption. And similarly, in BRVO also, you can study the macular ischemia. It may not be very useful in acute cases, but in old BRVO cases where there's not much of edema, you can very well see the perfusion status of the macula, and you can pick up the new vessels. And in MACTEL, it has been very useful. So here you can see on the FFA, because of the leakage from the telangiectatic vessels, the vascular details are lost. So you can still see some leakage telangiectatic vessels, but you don't see much of details because of the leakage. But OCTA is very useful. So you can see the changes, progressive changes that you appreciate. So it starts in the DCP. You can see there's a vessel rarefaction of the capillaries, and then the FSG gets distorted. There's a telangiectatic vessels. There's abnormal anastomosis between the two layers, and you can pick up the outer retinal vessels also. So I think 2015, we published one article where we described all these features that could be seen on OCTA in cases of MACTEL. So the FFA only picks up the superficial capillary plexus, but the main pathology starts from the DCP, and then the SCP gets involved. So this is one case, MACTEL. So here you can see there's a serous PED in both the eyes. 1 minute. Sorry for the confusion. So here you can see there's a serous PED in both the eyes, and in the left eye there is a irregular PED with the ileum drape sign also is seen. So we know that MACTEL can get complicated by CNVM formation. So FFA is useful, but FFA, there's a sort of leakage that happens from the perifoveal capillaries. So it becomes difficult to say the leakage is from the new vessels or from the telangiectatic vessels. So OCTA is useful in such cases. So here you can see in the outer retina and the chorocapillary, you can see there's a abnormal vasculature, and the left eye also shows abnormal vasculature. So it's very useful to pick up neovascularization in cases of MACTEL. Similarly, in CNVM also, you can see there's a subretinal fluid here, the SHREM, a small PED, and the FFA also shows the CNVM. And OCTA also picks up very nicely. So you can see there's a increased capillary density, there is a profuse anastomosis of the small caliber vessels, and after 3 injections, you see the vessels have regressed. This large feeder vessel is seen. Mature vessels are not going to go away, but it helps in the follow-up. And this then you have to correlate to the structural OCT. Based on that, you can decide whether the CNVM is active or not. Similarly, now we'll talk of the need for manual segmentation. So if the CNVM is of type 2, then most of the time automated segmentation is good enough. But if the CNVM is located deeper, that is sub-RP or in the pigment epithelium detachment, you may have to do manual segmentation. So here you can see in the left side, automated segmentation just shows a tuft of vessels, but you don't see the entire morphology of the lesion. The true extent is not seen. But if you do the manual segmentation and you go a little deeper, then you can see the very nice the vasculature. So the vasculature is seen, and then you can confidently say that this CNVM looks active. So here, this is a small video. So this is mainly a scarred CNVM. So in the superficial deep capillary plexus, you don't see much, but as we keep going down, you can see, you can see there's a dead tree trunk-like appearance. Mature vessels are seen. So this combined with structural OCT tells you that we are dealing with a scarred CNVM. Okay, and Octa is also very useful in PCV. In PCV, there's an abnormal growth of vessels below the RP, and at the end, you can get polyps. So ICG is very important for diagnosing PCV. Here you can see there's a BVN, and you can see the polyps very well. And on Octa also, the BVN is most of the time seen very well. You can pick the BVN in a better way, but the polyps sometimes may not be seen because that the polyps could be small also, or the blood flow could be less in the polyps. In this case, you can see in the fundus photograph, there's a subretinal nodule here, and ICG picks the polyps very well. And the Octa also is picking up. Sometimes the polyps could be hyperreflective, or the inside could be dark surrounding with the peripheral hyperfluorescence. And the BVN also is seen here. And this is one automated segmentation, manual segmentation. So you can see there's a PED and a double layer sign. So as we keep going down into the retina, and once you approach the area of the double layer sign, you can see there are two areas of abnormal vasculature. So these are very well seen here. So it's very good to pick up BVN. And now we'll look at the role of Octa in myopic CNVM. So we know that patients with myopic CNVM don't have much of fluid. The exudation is less. OCT sometimes could be very subtle changes could be appreciated. So most of the time the diagnosis is based on the FFA, but it's an invasive procedure. Every time doing it is difficult. And when to stop, that also becomes difficult if we have to repeat FFA at each and every visit. Octa is very useful in such cases. So here you can see how nicely the membrane is seen. And you can see here, post-injection, the membrane has sort of resolved, regressed, the vasculature has come down, and the OCT also shows improvement in the edema. And this patient had recurrence. So you can see that again, the membrane has come back along with the structural OCT changes. So it's very useful in Octa. The only thing is you should get good images. If you can get good images, it is very good to pick up myopic CNVMs. And this is another case. I'll just finish. Yeah, chronic CSCR. You can see there's a irregular PED.
Naresh, we have enough time, so you can go around, sir. It's not a problem.
Okay, this is an irregular PED that you can see, and this is a brush pattern that sir had alluded earlier. You can see there's a Pachy vessel, thickened choroid. And if you do the FFA, you just see some sort of hyperfluorescence, but you're not sure what you're dealing with. But if you do the Octa, you can see there's a nice vasculature that is seen in the choroid capillary and the outer retina. And this patient needed anti-VEGF injections, and there was improvement. You can see the change on the pattern. So there are more mature vessels, but still some vascularization is still present there. So any elderly patient around 40s, 50 with a chronic CSR, with an irregular shallow PED, you should always get Octa done. And it is very good to pick up this neovasculopathy. This is known as pachychoroid neovasculopathy. This could be a sort of precursor. These patients with time could develop PCV also. And this is very interesting case. This is hypertensive choroidopathy. So we know that the choroid vasculature is not sort of auto-regulated. So any steep or very severe rise in BP can cause choroidal insufficiency. So here you can see in the left eye, you can see non-flow areas So, and this choroidal insufficiency is going to affect it can cause RP infarction, and it can change the permeability of the blood retinal barrier. So that's why you see this hyperrefractive material here and the subretinal fluid. So in a patient with high BP, doing FFA is not easy and it's not indicated. So Octa can be very useful in malignant hypertension and patients with hypertensive choroidopathy. So to conclude, Octa visualizes the retinal vasculature in a dieless manner. It is very useful in picking up CNVM in myopia and Mactal. It has helped in understanding the pathophysiology of Mactal and need to utilize automated segmentation more in cases of neovascular AMD. Especially, we are dealing with the CNVM is below the RP, type 1. And DCP learning curve in interpreting images is steep. So you need to spend some time with the machine. You have to sit there, then only you can utilize the full utility and the value of Octa. Thanks a lot for a patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Naresh. I think you've given us a very good perspective of the role that OCT angio can play in our lives. For all retinal surgeons, I think over the next few years, OCTA is going to become indispensable for deciding how to treat their patients, for picking up a lot of early cases, especially in patients with chronic CSCR, where, you know, so far you say, well, no, there's nothing to be done. And now you realize that, no, there is something happening there. There are new vessels developing and they could respond to your treatment. So you have a basis for the treatment. So far, it used to be a trial hit and miss kind of thing. So this is one important thing. Tell me something, haven't you noticed that if you have a very large PED, actually you can't see any CNV in that area. That's an area which goes, in an occult CNVM where the predominant lesion is RPED, actually you would probably not get a very good response even with an OCTA. Or is it that there are some ways to get that out?
No, one thing we have to realize, this automated segmentation works for normal retina. When the retina is abnormal, all lesions are not flat. So many times you don't really go through the right plane. So if you really go and sit at the machine and you really scroll the entire retina, many times you will be surprised that you can pick up CNVMs that are below the PED. Sometimes it could be at the apex of the PED, or it could be below, or it could be the edge of the PEDs. So many times these can be picked up if you do a manual segmentation.
Yeah, so the edges of the PED are what we should be looking at, even if we are not seeing anything in the substance, which is black. But the edges may sometimes give us a clue. And then when you're going on the upper part, you may find the edge somewhere there. The only important, I think one caveat would be that there is a circular artifact which comes when you're scanning a PED. You have to be careful, which is from the retinal vessels actually, because of the angulation at which they come. And you must be careful to avoid that. They look like suspiciously like a CNVM if you look at just a section, but then you realize this is actually normal vasculature. So this is one important thing I think you have to be careful about. The other thing which you said also, and which we need to keep in mind, is once the new vessels have come and become mature, they are not going to go away. So don't treat based on those vessels on the OCT angio, but still you need to follow them up. And when those mature vessels show more further growth, a fuzzy kind of growth at the edges, that's the earliest indication that we can get for a recurrence, and that could be an indication for treatment. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, definitely. You have to look at the morphology of the sort of vasculature. So if it remains the same, then it is good. If there's any change in the morphology, the periphery, there is more anastomosis, fine capillaries are coming, and along with the structural OCT, so then definitely retreatment will be required.
The other thing I want to
other anxiolytics are available where you can look at the flow and all. So we've not really gone into that.
Yeah.
This is just the basics.
Yeah. Tell me, you were talking about the deep capillary plexus. Other than patients where you actually, when you're treating the patient's fluid goes away, and he's still not, vision is not improving. other than in that situation where the deep capillary plexus shows you that actually, there was extensive ischemia in that area, and that corroborates with your vision loss. Are there any other situations where you specifically have found the relationship of the deep capillary plexus, which we otherwise cannot see on a fluorescein angiogram, with the visual outcomes or visual prognosis?
I think the presence of microaneurysms. Sometimes these non-responders have more microaneurysms in the deep capillary plexus. Somehow they are not picked on the FFA also, and you pick them on the octa, and those are sort of patients who are not really going to do very well.
Okay, but do you treat those microaneurysms? You wouldn't
We still continue the treatment, but at least you can prognosticate that you may need more amount of injection, or at least you get a guideline how to really go about that.
Yeah.
Still, there's a lot to learn, because once there's a edema, somehow the entire morphology of the deep capillary, superficial capillary changes. So these all work very well. If the edema is very less, then you get good images.
Yes. Yeah. So actually, too much fluid is also a problem with the quality of your images. So that's one of the things at the moment. And hopefully with time, even that will be rectified. So Sabrina, do we have any questions? I can't see any questions on the question box.
Yes, doctor, 1 minute. I'll just check.
There was one question for Dr. Hemlata that I have answered on her behalf. She's in another session simultaneously. So I've already answered that.
You can tell the entire audience, no harm.
I have posted for the entire audience. Actually, the question was, how do we use the anterior segment OCT for corneal ulcers? And she's wanted us to know that it is used essentially to monitor the ulcer, especially in situations where we have a very advanced ulcer. So you can monitor the response to the treatment by measuring the infiltrates and the depth of the ulcer, and then modify it accordingly. So that's where its role is. I already answered that. Maybe that's why it's not showing up. It's coming up as answered.
Okay, thank you. So I think we are within our time, and we have 4 minutes.
Yes, doctor.
And I thank all the panelists for being here. I think we've given them the audience a wide perspective about OCT, and I hope it will be useful to everybody. And I think we've been doing this for at least 4 or 5 years, this particular session, and it's always very well attended. And what I'm missing is that we used to have huge number of questions, and that's why we had left so much time for the audience questions. But so far we did not get them. So I anyway spend more time on the lecture aspect. I want to thank you all. You've done a great job. And I look forward to seeing you in better times physically. And I hope the audience enjoyed this session as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to AIOS for giving us an opportunity to be here and to present our views on this very important topic. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And thank you,
Thank you, doctors, for finishing the session on time.